Hello. So, I recently took apart the media center computer I had in my living room because in an emergency I needed to build a gaming PC for a coworker's son to play essentially Fortnite and PUBG. That kind of left me with some options. At first I was going to wait and get a 3rd gen Ryzen 7 or 9, but I stumbled upon a deal at Microcenter this evening and it was too good to pass up. So what I'm going to build tonight is actually a 1st gen Ryzen 5 computer with a 2nd gen Ryzen board, and I'll kind of walk you through why I chose that and why I think it's a pretty good deal. And then I'll be using my last RX570. Might have to pick some more of these up used because they are really great cards, but I'm going to grab the old chassis first and then I'll walk you through the parts we're going to be putting in there. So here's our chassis. It is a no frills $20 rosewill micro-ATX case. I believe I have a used Corsair CX750 power supply in it. It already has an optical drive, and that's about it. But this power supply has an 8-pin EPS in it, which is great, because we're going to need that for the hardware. The receipt I'm pulling out just so I can tell you exactly what's going on. So the CPU, first, Ryzen 5, I believe it's a 1600. Yep. This camera's not terribly great, but Ryzen 5 1600, 6-core, 12-thread, 19 megs of cache, 3.2 gigahertz per core, base clock, hi Modi, 3.6 precision boost. And this actually comes with the Wraith Spire cooler, not the Stealth, so a much bigger, much better cooler, which is actually plenty for overclocking even. This was $70. It says $179.99 right here. This is a couple-year-old product. It's being kind of discontinued. Well, it already was discontinued, but these are being closed out at Microcenter right now for $80. And that is a hell of a deal for a 6-core, 12-thread part. Yeah, $79.99. For the board, I chose a B450 Gigabyte. This is pretty much as cheap as they get. Reason why I chose this, it was the cheapest overclockable board Microcenter had, and if you buy these together, you actually get $30 off. So the boards retail no way. $39.99? There is a savings markdown, so I'm not sure. It might be a $69.99 board that got marked down to $49.99. But either way, it's actually fairly nice. It has 4 DIMM slots in it. I'll pull it out so I can actually show you what I'm talking about. And this is brand new. This isn't even an open box. So I'll go over some nice features and some cost-cutting stuff. So like I said, 4 DIMM slots for dual channel, 2 PCIe X16 lanes, even though I believe, actually they might both be X16, so that's nice if you want to do crossfire. Just 1 M.2 slot for solid state drive, AM4, Modi, buddy. 24-pin PCIe. It does have an 8-pin EPS, which is pretty nice. And although the components are really nice for the VRM, it's not very chunky. It does have 1 heatsink over here, but not over here. Really, overclocking with this, you'll want to make sure you've got air cooling over that VRM, otherwise you're just probably going to cook it. I will actually try overclocking this chip because they usually do pretty well, but no frills. It really doesn't have anything for features. Like I said, I would like to see some heat sinking on there, no VGA or anything, but you know, it's fine. It's got 8 USB ports, it has USB 2 and USB 3, which is nice. And like I mentioned before, this is actually a 2nd gen Ryzen part. So this would have been designed to companion the Ryzen 5 2600X and 2700, but it works just fine with the first gen part. And actually, this has plenty of headroom to run the 105 watt TDP Ryzen 7 and 9 that are coming out in about a month. So if you wanted to build this now and still have some headroom for later, you could easily build this and then upgrade to a 12 or 16 core chip without any issue in just a month or up to years, whatever you want to do. So I'll set this back aside. Go over the RAM. So this I did buy open box because there's no bundle deal, and they had a lot of this returned. I'm not sure if I should worry about that or not. Originally it was $84.99. It's 16 gigs of DDR4 3200. G Skill Ripjaw. It's actually very highly rated RAM. Really nice heat spreaders. I've actually taken these apart on the January build I did. I used the 2400 megahertz stuff in that Ryzen 3. And that works really, really well. So I'm hoping to get the same kind of results out of this. I'm not expecting to get the 3200 megahertz speed out of it just because this is a Ryzen system, and the first and second gen chips are really picky about RAM. But I am expecting to get 2933 or 3000 out of it, which should be plenty to drive that. But it is a 16 gig kit, and this was $67.96. I cannot believe how cheap DDR4 is right now. This is kind of on par with those Neo Forza kits I bought late last year with my Threadripper, and those are arguably worse branding, and those I think I paid $115 for the DIMM kit, and that was a great deal. So now is a great time to build a machine, and honestly, first gen Ryzen is still a really solid part. Nothing wrong with it at all, and $80 for that chip and that cooler is an amazing deal. $67.96 is a great deal for this RAM, and $40 for a B450 motherboard from Gigabyte is incredible, even if the VRM isn't great. A couple other just cheapy finds. I picked up a 120 and a 240 gig M.2 drive for $17.99 and $26.99 respectively. I'm going to be throwing the 240 in here probably. I meant to order one to actually upgrade this MSI, but I totally didn't. And this actually has a 1 terabyte hard drive in it as well, so kind of waffling on which one I throw in here. But one of them will be going in here for sure. So maybe I'll do the cheap one just to kind of promote this extra budget build once more, since I'm a huge fan of the low dollar high performance builds. So yeah, step one is just going to be jamming the I/O shield in the back of this case. Standoff should all be in the right spot for this motherboard. I do already have all 8 pins of the EPS pulled and ready for this motherboard. And yeah, there's not much to it. So I'm gonna get cracking. And yeah, feel free to watch along. Standard business. I/O shield's always first. Snap in the bottom and snap in the top. Easy peasy. Double checking the standoff locations. Looks good. And again, this previously had a system in it that I just took apart. It was also AM4. You'll find a lot of people will socket the CPU first. In this particular case, I probably will, just because the visibility is better for you guys, but you can do it just as easily when the motherboard's in the chassis. I always like to save my packaging, so I'm gonna very carefully peel the sticker back. So another beauty of going with the first gen part and a second gen, any Ryzen motherboard, as you never have to worry about a boot kit. This thing will just straight up work no matter what gen you've got, because this is the lowest common denominator. So yeah, there's our chip. And of course, case sticker. And here we have the Wraith Spire cooler. The Ryzen 3 build comes with a Wraith Stealth, also a really great thermal solution. I believe they have the same fan, but this one is about double the thickness on the heatsink, and then it has a copper core, and I think the Stealth is all aluminum. This is really very substantial. This weighs probably a pound, maybe a little bit more, so a really great cooler. People overclock first gen Ryzen 7s on those with basically no issue. So it'll be just fine for our little 1600 here, especially if I don't go crazy. I may not even overclock it. Don't do what I just did there and drop your CPU. I got really lucky and didn't break a single pin or bend it over. Just double checking. That would be a huge problem. Be very careful with these. Intel is an LGA, which means all the pins are in the socket, and these are basically just flat dimples on the chip, but AMD with AM4 uses a PGA, which means the pins actually protrude on this chip. So there are hundreds of little gold-plated pins there. She's A-okay, thank goodness. That was super dumb. I'm glad you guys can see me at my worst. So open the zip socket. Find the gold arrow on the CPU, which in this case is the bottom left if you're looking at it normally. And then find the plastic arrow, which in my case is facing toward the EPS power. Should be 0 force, hence ZIF, 0 insertion force. So that's perfect, looks really good. And the Wraith Spire actually mounts differently, so we're going to go ahead and pull these little brackets off of the board, these plastic retention brackets for the basic AM4 coolers, because these actually screw in to the carrier on the back on their own. So little spring-loaded thumb screw things, pretty nice design. But that does involve taking these things off. This might be one case where I would approve doing this outside of the case. If you've got a plate on the back, you don't have to worry about lining the screws up quite as much when you do it this way, because you can get one of your hands behind it and hold it. But it's a pretty quick, simple process. So for the cooler, AMD needs to face your I/O shield or your DIMMs. I almost always face it toward the I/O shield, because I know for sure. Also, make sure there's no plastic on your silkscreen thermal paste. That would be embarrassing. And then lightly thread in the cooler in the corners first. And then get all four going. And these have a preset spring tension on them, so it takes pretty much all the guesswork out of what to do. So just screw them down by hand or with a screwdriver lightly until you feel some tension, then stop. That's really all there is to it. And I actually have an M.2, so in the interest of doing all this, or at least most of this while it's most visible, I'm going to pop that in right now, and let's just go with 120, why not? I've got a 1 terabyte supplemental drive in here which has most of the collateral on it anyway, so this will basically just be our OS boot drive, and then anything we need to be really quick. I've got that FreeNAS machine down here now too, which is pretty cool. And that actually has most of our local data on it now. So you'll see that this is, what's the form factor of this? There are basically 3 lengths of these drives, or 4, and this is the second to longest. It's by far the most common, so you'll generally see the standoff and the screw that's included will be set at that distance on its own. I think these are called like 3380s or something like that. And that's basically the width and the length. That's all it is. So I'm going to just unscrew the screw from the standoff, slip the drive in at an angle like a laptop SODIMM, till all the gold is invisible, and then hinge it down and lightly tighten the screw. Do not torque on that because you will crack the PCB and you will be SOL. And CPU fan we're doing next. In this case, hi Modi. Modi! Hi buddy. What you doing? CPU fan in this case is a gray header up at the top. It will be marked. So plug the CPU into that, otherwise you will get some post errors and it'll just be generally pretty unhappy. Next up, motherboard manual time, because we want dual channel RAM. There are 2 different color plastic slots. We just want to make sure that we are indeed leveraging all that RAM at once. So we've got DDR4 1, 2, 3, and 4. And honestly, this has almost no information. I'm guessing there's a PDF user's manual on this. But I'm going to go with the 2 black slots, and we'll check that later to see if that is indeed correct. We will be able to see in the BIOS if it's operating in dual channel, and we can correct it if it's not. Get that out of the way. Okay, so time for the RAM. Again, this is 16 gigs of DDR4 3200 G Skill Ripjaw. It was $67 and change, plus tax. So open up your DIMM slot, get it centered, and then push down evenly until you hear the clicks. Some motherboards only have 1 tab that opens, so you slide it into the lower and then you hinge it down, kind of like your M.2. There we go. We have 16 gigs of RAM socketed, and now it is legit time to throw this in the chassis. So I'm going to carefully pick it up by the heatsink, and we'll get this thing set down in here. This is a really tight fit case. Really tight fit. Oh my goodness. So I've got a bunch of I/O down here that I have to make sure I'm not trapping. Wowza. So right now my 1 terabyte hard drive is really in the way. I think I got everything. Working on 1 SATA cable that is stuck. Okay. I think we're good. I'm actually going to plug in most of these right now to see if I'm missing anything, obviously. Starting with the front audio header, which is in the bottom corner. These are pretty much idiot-proof connectors. Most of them only fit in 1 slot. The audio is the widest connector. USB has got a dead pin in the corner, which right now is actually pointing at the COM port. Not what I want at all. USB 3 is usually the only one to have a surround on the connector, so it'll actually have raised plastic sides. And then your front panel LED headers and, oh my god, I think I might have a standoff in the wrong place. I do. So this actually has to come back out before I can fully install it. That's a bummer. So I get to try that again. One of our standoffs, the one right here, is not far enough down. And luckily I do have a toolkit down here. with the proper size socket to remove and replace a standard motherboard standoff. It's good to find that out before everything is done. This was originally an A320M board with a, I think it was an AMD Athlon A8 9600, the bootkit CPU, essentially that. But again, I upgraded that at some point to the 200GE, and now it is combined with an RX570, and it is used to game by somebody else. So, take two. Let's get this in here. I think that went better this time. Yes. Affirmative. Everything came through. Not everything's in exactly the same spot, however. I'm a little bit worried about the front panel connectors being able to reach. Everything is crammed really tightly in the back on this chassis because it is a total piece of garbage and it has no cable management at all. However, the power switch will reach, as will the reset switch, so I'm going to call that a win. Actually, the HDD LED will as well. The only light that won't is the split power LED. I don't know why that is a different length than the other connectors, but it is. So again, back to the front audio header first. I had this thing cable managed very tightly before, and now I just don't care quite as much, which is liberating. So I just got the front audio, front USB, SATA, which I've actually got 3 cables in here. Originally I had a 2.5-inch SATA SSD in here, but that went with the build, or the motherboard and CPU rather, when I sold that off. So I won't be using one of the 3 cables in this build since we do have an M.2, which is just better. And if you have questions on how to wire the front panel, it's always in the motherboard manual. However, it's usually printed on the headers themselves, or right next to it rather. So power switch is the only one you need. Reset switch is nice, and then you've got power LED just to indicate that it's on, which you really shouldn't need, and then also you have caching or hard drive SSD activity light. And I believe that works for slotted media like an M.2 and or a SATA or IDE, hard disk or solid state drive as well. Okay, USB 3 header is also in. Working around all of these connectors, it's a tight fit, but we're good. So now I have to figure out exactly what screw. There's kind of a fine and a coarse thread option for these standoffs. These happen to be fine thread, which I do have here, but again, make sure that you know what you're getting into, just so you don't waste time and potentially try to rethread some standoffs with the incorrect hardware. That would be embarrassing. Alright. A magnetic screwdriver is also something I would recommend. If you don't have one, get one, especially if you're operating in a tiny chassis like this. A bigger case, you can usually get at everything pretty easily, but this one is very space constrained. I do not have that many fine pitch screws in here. Interesting. considering I took the system out on this same bench. Slightly perturbing. At least I do have some thumb screws with the correct pitch. It's a little too deep. Getting closer, two left. Okay, so all that's in. Next up will be motherboard power and EPS. If you have a more modern power supply, basically anything that has an 8-pin EPS, it'll usually be a split 4+4 connector, like this Corsair CX750M. Just snap it back together, and then snap it into the header on the motherboard. You may have a single 4, you may have a single 8, you might have an 8 and a 4, or you might have twin 8s, depending on how sophisticated your board is, how nice it is, how much power it needs, frankly. Next up, 24-pin mATX Power. Again, another really tight fit in this case. Everything's a tight fit. And I do have actually 6+2 PCIe power connectors there. We're only going to need one set of those for our RX570. I do have an LED light in here too, just for the street cred. However, I'm not sure if I'll hook that up. I'm going to be throwing in 4 gig. What does this say? MSI Gaming X, I think. RX570. This one still works just fine. However, down here, I did unfortunately rip a chip off of it about 6 months ago, and I have no idea what that chip was for, what it did, but it seems to function just fine without it. But I'm going to... Oh. If your case has an I/O plate on the back of it, preventing you from installing stuff, go ahead and remove that first. That'd be a good first step. And then, I actually might have to move these SATAs down a bit. Looks like this one may interfere with the card. We'll give it a go before moving it, just to see. No, we're actually okay. That's a tight fit, but tight fit is okay. And power. Another extremely tight fit. It is intertwined in my USB 3.0 front header cord, which unfortunately I just ripped out of the motherboard. So GPU comes back out. It's an awfully big card for such a small chassis. But front USB 3.0 is a useful thing, so we will absolutely be making sure that that is accessible and plugged in. Oh, one other thing. I'm actually going to install a 10 gigabit Ethernet card in this as well, because there's a fairly decent chance I will be running 10 gig Ethernet to this machine, because of reasons. And just a brief description on this. This is a used Mellanox 2-port 10 gigabit Ethernet card. These do get pretty toasty. I wouldn't recommend taxing one of these too much without some additional cooling in your case And you will need a x 4 or better slot to run one of these. And honestly, this does not fit properly. Fits okay in that slot. I think I have a case issue here more than I have a card issue. So the bottom tab on an expansion card is pretty small, and it fits into a groove in the back side of the chassis. This one is clearly not having it. So a little persistence hopefully will pay off. Okay, back to the RX570. Actually, the fans on this card might cool, passively, the heatsink on the 10 gigabit Ethernet card as well, which would be pretty neat. It's awfully tight in there, but that's fine. So I'm going to put the plate back on, put a screw in it, and make sure it's the right kind of screw. I believe this is also a fine thread. Get this card anchored down. Modi, what are you doing, buddy? Okay. There we go. The Media Center PC, or whatever we're calling it, is assembled. Time to plug it in to power and peripherals and such, and throw Windows on it. I'm gonna have to run upstairs really quick because my Windows installer is not down here. Peachy. I'll be right back. Oh, I was wrong. I do have it. It's just over here. So I'm going to pop that in the front USB 3.0 header to make sure it's working. It is worth mentioning, if you do this same combination, you will need a GPU. You will find HDMI ports and all that on your motherboard, but it won't work with the 1600 because it is not an X. And the X stands for, or in the case of the Ryzen 3, the G, it stands for Internal Graphics Processor. These processors don't have that. So you will absolutely need something. Doesn't have to be much, just has to be PCIe compatible. And, well, the keyboard flashed, that's a good sign. And I do have an SFP cable for 10 gig, however I don't think that will reach my switch. I might have a copper adapter upstairs. Once we get Windows installed, I'll maybe mess with that a little bit, but the card is in. I'm going to plug it into the video capture device so you guys can see what I see. And I will highlight bench computer and turn it on. That's a good sign. The lights on the card are on, lights on the motherboard are on. Do we get a post? It's not uncommon for this to take about 30 seconds first time out, as the motherboard kind of figures out what's plugged into it for the first time and starts to boot. There we go. Good sign. I was a little worried about this RAM. It was returned, and they had a bunch of returned G Skill Ripjaw 3200 series kits. So I'm glad it's okay. It has already detected the flash drive, and it is UEFI booting. This is excellent. This is great. Haven't had to do anything. So I'm going to go ahead and put Windows on this. Let's see how fast we can do that with this cheapo M.2. Yeah. So, unallocated space. Let's make a new partition on that drive. Our terabyte is pretty full. Alright, so that is going to be our install drive. And we are copying off a USB 3.0 flash drive through the working USB 3.0. Wow, that's already done. I should time this, it's probably pretty quick. Onto our 120 gigabyte Kingston M.2. I think this is a SATA drive. I don't think it's an NVMe. I don't actually know how to tell that. These drives, sorry, this is the small video thing, but the copper pins on the end, they're split either once or twice, and I think that has something to do with the protocol they use. But I think the double split just means it's a by 4 interface method, so it's using more PCIe lanes, which is pretty cool for more performance. But I do think that these are SATA, which is still ridiculously fast. I mean, you could use an actual 2.5-inch serial ATA based SSD in these, and the performance is just, it'll blow you out of the water. So I actually recently took a HP laptop from 2006 that had an SSD put in it in 2010. It was a 64 gig Kingston, really nice 2.5-inch drive, and it was just always full. I mean, obviously 64 gigs. I only used it for shipping labels and old diagnostics, but I cloned it block for block, MBR cloned, onto a $18 Kingston 120 gig, just the cheapest, crappiest 2.5 SATA SSD I could find, and like the boot times cut in a third. I mean, it was ridiculous how much faster just the newer technology was, even with old SATA interfaces, old hardware. So even if you're using a SATA M.2, which, for the record, the slot is M.2, and the two protocols they use are SATA and NVMe. So if you find somebody calling that slot an NVMe slot, that's not right. I think my cat's knocking stuff over there. But anyway, moral of the story, really, really fast drives. I'm hopeful that this completes soon, because I know this is really interesting television, watching me install Windows on a computer. Oh yeah, optical drive still works. I've actually noticed in the last 6 months that a couple of case manufacturers releasing new models for 2019 are actually giving you the option to have an optical drive back, which is really nice. When I rebuilt the Threadripper, my main computer, I bought a Corsair 570X Crystal because it was the best looking case with the versatility I needed, but I was a little bummed that it didn't have an optical drive bay. I know that's kind of a relic of the past at this point, but still something I enjoy. That was weird. Touched the heat pipes and I swear it shocked me, but I think I've got something stuck in my fingers. So anyway, back to 10 gig, I guess, since this is installing. These Mellanox SFP Plus cards, I think you can get them for $25 or $30 from, air-conditioned server environments where they really aren't stressed out all that much. And then you can buy either SFP Plus cables like these, and it is worth noting that you have to do SFP Plus, not SFP. They are physically identical. However, the protocols within are not compatible, so although you can plug in SFP into an SFP Plus and usually get that to work. You cannot do the other way around, so you can't have an SFP switch or an SFP network card be recognized with a 10 gigabit SFP Plus cable like this. So if you buy one of these Mellanox cards for $30, you buy one of these cables on Amazon, let's say for $10, and you buy one of those 5-port microtic switches, I mean, each end of that network, as long as they're within that physical distance, you can, I think the switch is $230. So really, you can get 10 gigabit transfer speeds, especially if you have one of these really fast SSDs in here, between two computers or more for like $300 all in, which is really, really great. This will proliferate and get a lot cheaper as time goes on. It's already getting cheaper. I've got 10 gigabit throughout the entire house here, and it's handy. And you can still use it with RJ45 in a lot of cases if you have a built-in 10 gig NIC. It's pretty neat. And you can actually adapt these down to RJ45 with what's called a copper adapter. So, little quick rundown of why I put 10 gig in here. The FreeNAS box where we store all of our movies and things like that in the house is on 10 gig. Our computers upstairs are on 10 gig. There's a link between the garage and downstairs and 10 gig. There's a link between down here and the computer and 10 gig. So it's really, really handy, and we legitimately see 750 gigabytes, or gigabit? Gigabit, I think. 750. Is that not right? No, I think we see 750 megabytes a second through the LAN at times, which is really, really good. I'm actually going to yank the flash drive here and reboot it. I think it's trying to pull another copy of Windows down. You can fix that by going into the BIOS and reselecting boot order. I just messed up, so that's all there is to that. Everything seems pretty happy, nice and cool. So anytime you see like your BIOS menu like this and it's got the little twirly doop, it just means your computer's booting in UEFI mode, which is Windows 10 and newer standard. That's a good thing if you see that. Don't worry about it. Doesn't mean your computer's not booting. It's just doing it in a little more modern way. I do hope this is working though. I don't actually know what's going on here. That's not good. I mean, the cache light's working, so I'm going to give it the benefit of the doubt and give it a second here. But this should be quicker. Especially with all this fancy hardware. Aha! There we go. That was oddly slow. I don't know what's going on there, but let's click through. Nope. Yeah, skip Ethernet for now. No. Oh, media. I forget they make you do this. Really? Security questions. What's your childhood nickname? Same as it currently is. You guys are learning so much about me today. Is that just data mining? I wonder if they actually do anything with that, or if that's legitimately just for recovery. Nope. So anyway, the downside to running a first-gen Ryzen CPU like this instead of a second or the upcoming third is obviously power efficiency. These aren't going to be as good as a second or third gen. They're actually really close to as efficient as the second gen because they're both on the Zen Plus architecture. But you'll get a little lower clock speeds out of this than you would out of a 2 or 3 part, and then the instructions per clock will be obviously lower here too, but you can usually overclock these a little bit to gain quite a bit of that back, and honestly, this is still, you kind of have to think of it in terms of where your hardware is bottlenecking, and this CPU, it'll probably bottleneck with a 1080 Ti, but I bet you could run up to either a 1070 Ti or a 1080, and not see any slowdown from the CPU on your game, depending on the title and the engine, obviously. But it gives you a lot of headroom. I mean, that really is a good part still, and for $80, it's a no-brainer in my opinion. So all-in cost on this. So $220 for the hardware, $100 for a used GPU. It's actually less than that now, so we'll call that 80 bucks for that. So we'll be at 300 including the GPU. This power supply I bought used for 25 bucks. So 325. The case was $20. So 345. Wow, so that's ridiculous. This is really, you're looking at minus the 10 gig card and this hard drive and the optical drive, which you don't need. This is $345 in hardware, and that's ridiculously good. The RX570 is actually probably a bit of a letdown for this CPU. I'd be better off with an RX580 here or a 480 flashed. Even a Vega 56 would be a great match for this, or you know, a 1066 gig or a 1070 or an RTX 2060 even would be a great fit. So yeah, this is going to be used primarily as a media center computer for me. Should do that pretty well. Occasional gaming, plenty of CPU headroom for encoding for OBS and things like this. Yeah, I'm pretty excited. So I'm going to probably just button this thing up and I'll throw some software on it. I'm not going to bore you with it, but yeah, if you're gonna do a relatively budget-ish build right now, and this is June 2019, and you have a Microcenter nearby, take them up on this Ryzen 5 1600 deal because that is ridiculously cheap. Also, DDR4 is basically free right now, so I would highly recommend taking advantage of all that stuff. Do make sure you buy a B350 or 450 board or better. Make sure, hi buddy! If you're buying a B350, make sure it's on the compatibility list with your manufacturer to get a flash for the 3rd gen CPU. 450s are solid no matter what. And yeah, an 8-pin EPS would be good, just if you're planning to upgrade it in the future. But this is a hell of a good computer for that amount of money. You can obviously step up the case and make it fancier. I've actually got an AeroCool Cylon that I'm going to be building a kind of a budgety Intel computer with in the near future. I don't really like Intel offerings, but I would show you what I would build anyway. And that'll be coming soon. But stay tuned for that, and then also eventually I'll be doing a 3rd gen Ryzen build, and then when the new Threadrippers come out, I'm either going to be upgrading my current rig to a 2nd gen 2990WX, which is the 32 core part, or I'll be going with a 3rd gen 32 core part. So yeah, there's that. This thing's pretty solid. If I think of it, I will do another short clip with some benchmarks, 3D marking, kind of comparing it to the Ryzen 3 build I did earlier, because I mean, it's kind of nice having a double blind with the exact same GPU. I've had this thing in a Threadripper, I've had it in the Ryzen, I've had it in the AMD A8, the Athlon 200GE, and now a Ryzen 5 first gen. So we'll kind of take a look at 2nd gen Ryzen 3 versus 1st gen Ryzen 5 performance. This should blow it out of the water, a lot more processing threads, but yeah, it's a pretty sweet little machine, and it should do everything I need for driving 1 or 2 4K displays at the same time. So pretty excited. Yeah, that's all I got for now. Thanks very much for following along, and I'll catch you guys next time.